You were right all along. I'm not a space ranger. I'm just a toy, a stupid, little, insignificant toy.
Toy Story is a film with great heart in a way that I think often gets underrated. Somehow, all the more obvious sentiments of nostalgia towards childhood that this film taps into can make people overlook the deeper, more emotional struggles at its core. On a basic level, I think this film is about wanting to feel needed, and how sometimes that is important, and how at other times feeling needed doesn't mean the same thing as feeling loved. I don't think there's anybody alive who hasn't at some point felt hurt in moments they weren't needed, because it's a stinging thought to consider: what if I'm not needed by others? What if they can replace me or forget or abandon me altogether? What if you go from being someone's special favourite to being lost?
I'm lost. Oh, I'm a lost toy.
Which ultimately is then a question of, do I matter? Not in the grand existential sense, but do I matter to my friends, family, to anybody? I'd be a liar if I said I've never had times where I questioned that, particularly when I was young. But this is also as much a fun film as it is a very heartfelt film. It's the genius of Toy Story to weave so much nostalgia in with such heartfelt themes. All the while there is great humour, a driving narrative, and some really solid action scenes. The bit in Sid's bag entering his house is just great tension. There's also so many good stealth sequences, chases, fights. Even just the toy soldiers at the beginning trying to radio in what Andy's getting in his presents and the batteries falling out the radio is a really good action moment.
It's a what? What is it?
Nonetheless, let's begin at the beginning with the idea I first raised. The film begins with a very palpable fear among the toys. It's Andy's birthday, which means he gets new presents, new toys, and they're all afraid that means they might get replaced. As Rex puts it,
What if Andy gets another dinosaur? A mean one. I just don't think I can take that kind of rejection.
the fear there's always someone better than you out there. If they come in, would they take my place? Would Andy forget about me in favour of someone better? It's only Woody who isn't gripped by this fear, because he, of course, is Andy's favourite. He sleeps on the bed. We've just seen a very touching sequence of the two of them while Randy Newman sings "You've Got a Friend in Me." Woody isn't at all worried until suddenly Buzz appears. A cooler, better built toy with wings and buttons and lasers. Suddenly Andy's less into cowboys than space rangers, which I think might be a nod to the film industry westerns giving way to sci-fi. I said already that this is quite a natural fear we all encounter at times. The fear of being replaced technically has less to do with these outer people who might come in and take your spot as it is to do with this internal worry of, do I deserve this place I have? Am I good enough to keep it? And in its relation to Andy, I guess it's the fear of abandonment, really. And I think through the metaphor of these toys in this film, we see that fear expressed in three different but important ways. One is with the idea of sibling rivalry. Andy, this parent-like figure to the toys. Woody is his special toy who knows he'll always have a
special place for you.
sole focus of his attention until suddenly along comes this other child who looks very similar to you, sort of thing. And you notice in that experience that naturally you don't get sole centre of attention focus anymore because that time is now shared, and it makes you worry you might lose even more attention. Maybe all attention. Maybe they'll prefer this other child and just get fed up with you. We're insecure beings at times. It's easy to forget that because a parent's attention, or anyone's, might get split half and half between two siblings, it doesn't mean they then each get 50% of the parent's love too, because they don't. They each still get 100% love. Time and attention does not always equate to love, even if in our earliest experiences it's part of how we learn about it. But it's the great worry, one so extreme Woody feels he has to lead an attack on Buzz. He attempts to get him trapped down the side of the table because when Andy's mum says Andy's only allowed to take one toy with him to Pizza Planet, Woody can't bear the thought that it might not be him. And then the second way it's expressed is the feelings of abandonment or being forgotten by your tribe, let's say. Woody has a clear place and role in a solid community as their leader. He is the figure of authority, as is referenced in the song Strange Things.
I had power, I was respected, but not anymore.
It's not just that Woody feels needed by Andy in a way that makes him feel special, but he's also needed by the other toys. Both these things obviously important to his sense of self-worth and his sense of identity. I'm the sheriff, Andy's partner, the guy people rely on. Until suddenly they start relying on Buzz, who can teach Rex to roar better, comb people's hair, run gym sessions and build shelters and everything. You know, all of this isn't such a concern for Woody because he's like power hungry or anything. I don't think he is really. I think he just wouldn't know who he is without that clear position in the community. And we know these situations can happen in jobs where someone similar comes in, and sometimes even friendship groups. Two people can't play the exact same role. Rex is the dinosaur of the group. If there were two, then they'd be vying for that same spot as group dinosaur. Just like there can't be two hero archetypes, or so Woody fears. In Woody's eyes, it's either him or Buzz. And these experiences I think do sometimes tie into past experiences of sibling rivalry, or maybe even more tribal experiences, like Woody is tribe chief who feels threatened by Buzz for tribe dominance. When Woody tries to trap Buzz behind a table, he accidentally knocks him out of the window instead, at which point his tribe turns on him. I think you can make a lot of good points here to do with murderous fantasies involved in rivalry and the guilt following that kind of fantasy. But really it hits breaking point in the much later scene, looking to the toys from the window of Sid's room, even Slink giving up faith in Woody and abandoning him in a genuinely touching moment.
Slink! Slink, please! Please, listen to me! No! Don't come back! Slink!
And it just makes me think, as a slight tangent, of how many stories and horrors there are around some stranger coming in and stealing your identity. That probably does tie into all of this, these basic same fears extended outwards. And then there's the third idea expressed through this metaphor. It's the idea of parents having to let their children go as they grow into adults. Woody begins the film arguing,
It doesn't matter how much we're played with. What matters is that we're here for Andy when he needs us. That's what we're made for, right?
That's an idea of the toys playing a parental role to Andy, being there for him as he grows up. And since kindergarten, Woody has been Andy's favourite, as he's deeply into cowboys. Then he changes. Space Rangers become his new obsession. Suddenly, Woody feels unimportant. And parents get that. Their children need them, depend on them massively throughout childhood until they reach teenage years and start trying to distance from their parents in order to learn independence. And parents start to worry that they're hated by their kids, that their children don't care about them at all. But when their kids become adults and leave home, you're happy to see them go, but also a little sad because you know they never quite depend on you in the same way they once did. Half your purpose and identity as someone to help this child grow is done with, or imagined to be. That hurts. Through this one ongoing metaphor of the toys and Andy, this film is able to draw on all three of those real experiences quite masterfully, really. But what do we make of any of this? This isn't just a film using metaphor to express the idea that all of these things are painful, that they hurt. This film also has answers and resolutions to the hurt. I think I've already said the main lesson Woody takes away from this film. Being loved doesn't mean being needed all the time. Sometimes being loved means being able to trust that you don't have to need each other all the time. To trust that just because Andy is into Space Rangers now doesn't mean he cares for Woody any less. Doesn't mean there isn't still a wealth of warm memories and experiences Andy had playing games with Woody. All of that is still imprinted in his heart, because it transpires Andy is just as sad about Woody going missing as he is about Buzz. He does care, and he's just as overjoyed to have him back. And I guess Woody is confronted with the very difficult truth you can't always be centre stage in everything. It's what every child comes to have to learn at some point, and normally it gives rise to rivalrous feelings such as the Oedipus complex. But not always being centre stage doesn't necessarily mean you have to compete for it. Woody learns to work with Buzz. Whilst both of them are the hero archetypes, they also have unique strengths and weaknesses. Woody proves the sort of leader who is better at formulating plans, getting people on board, giving them roles to execute that plan, such as he does with Sid's toys near the end. Whereas Buzz is the sort who leads by example and with his own direct, heroic action. So whilst they inhabit similar roles, they aren't the same people. Buzz isn't stealing Woody's identity as he first might fear. And that kind of makes me think of how often siblings are the complete opposites of each other, how often they're described as like chalk and cheese or whatever else. Sid's, even here, is all about explosives and horror surgery.
I don't believe that man's ever been to medical school.
And skulls on his shirt, whereas his sister Hannah is all about Darjeeling tea and nice hats and Mrs. Nesbit. Sometimes kids stretch things to make it as absolutely clear as possible that they are nothing like their siblings.
I wanna ride the pony.
I used to immediately hate any music my brother was into, even if I'd never heard it. That was just, nope, they're awful. If you're too similar and you're already worried you might be fighting for your parents' affection, then there's the added worry that you're fighting for that one clear identity. Whereas if you're both completely different people, then you're in less direct conflict, if that makes sense. Rex, for example, isn't worried so much about Andy getting a new toy as he's worried about Andy getting a new dinosaur, because that's Rex's thing. Being the dinosaur in games who roars and stuff. So I think largely sibling rivalry flits between moments of rivalry and moments of compromise, where they each fit into their own unique roles, and hopefully gradually, as they grow to realise their parents love them unconditionally and that there is space for both of them, the lines of difference they draw between each other can be reduced a little and they can relax a bit. Two hero archetypes and figures of authority can find their place in the community as unique people. If they can set aside a lot of the rivalry, they'll likely find they get along very well, just as two dinosaurs could have their place. Rex even ends the film hoping for it.
Maybe Andy will get another dinosaur, like a leaf eater. That way I could play the dominant predator.
I guess it's about trust, fundamentally, to learn and trust that we can have a place for ourselves, not as someone filling a role we have to compete with others for, but a place carved out specifically just for who we are, our unique spot. And as I say, sure, that point applies to sibling rivalry, but it also applies to any situations in groups we might encounter throughout our lives. Really, we need to talk about Buzz in order to tie everything together, though, because I think that's what his character comes to do in this film, tie things together. So let's do that. You've got to feel sorry for Buzz. He had a strong concept of who he was. He was this special elite space ranger with a super important mission. He had drive and purpose. I think all of it summed up in his belief that he can fly. Except he has to discover he's none of those things. Not only is he actually a toy rather than a space ranger, but he's one of a billion Buzz Lightyear toys. He's not special. Very much like the rest of us, he's just another number in the vast human race. He can't fly. And that realization plunges him head first into depression. The sequence of him trying to fly with the I Will Go Sailing No More song is just perfect. Possibly my favourite moment of this film. Randy Newman did a wonderful job with the music all over this film, and it's heartbreaking. Buzz goes from, I think, drinking his sorrows away and desperately grasping at the only other sense of purpose he can find, which is being Mrs. Nesbit.
You see the hat? I am Mrs. Nesbit.
I kind of love him lamenting,
The hat look good? Tell me the hat look good. The apron is a bit much.
as though he so needs to feel good and special in a role. He flips from that to just total lethargic collapse.
I can't help anyone. Andy's house, Sid's house. What's the difference? I'm just a toy, a stupid little insignificant toy.
If I'm allowed to make a tangent, well, not technically the same point. This does just remind me of that first video I made criticising Dr. Phil, where he tried to force a girl suffering with delusions to see that they were just delusions. Told her she was living in Fantasyland, and I said how painful and horrible a thing that is to do to someone. But it's not just that, it's also that people develop delusions mostly to cope with some sort of pain that feels too overwhelming to directly think about. You know, though not the most healthy defence, it is still a defence, and if you just strip that away, it doesn't remove all the pain, it just makes it more glaring. In this instance, I suppose you've just turned Buzz from someone suffering with a delusion into someone suffering with depression. Which is also an interesting point, actually. People always say the one big plot hole and issue with this film is that why, if Buzz thinks he's an actual space ranger, does he keep going still and freeze up like all the other toys when Andy and Sid are around? It is a plot hole. Technically, I think you could argue Buzz is just in denial, though. Buzz just wants to feel special about something, this great hero and space ranger who can fly, because his self-worth without that feels incredibly low, so he maybe develops this delusion that he ends up believing, and maybe he freezes around humans because that is still his instinct, and he refuses to consider that rational evidence that he's a toy, because he just wants to be more than that. Having to face the fact he's just a toy and not someone special hurts too much. You can definitely make that argument about the plot hole. You know, actually, I think I will make that argument. I doubt it was their intention, but I think it fits. And it's then Woody that makes the important point to Buzz.
Over in that house is a kid who thinks you are the greatest, and it's not because you're a space ranger, pal. It's because you're a toy. You are his toy.
You know, perhaps that question of whether or not we matter, what the existential truth is, perhaps what's important is only whether or not we matter to those around us. I sort of began this video with something along those lines. Buzz has gone from this clear ambition and purpose, the way I think so many of us grow up so ambitious, to then, on the one hand, have to learn to settle for less than our dreams. To an extent, not always. Quite a brutal lesson for a kid's film, really. You can't fly, Buzz. You can't be a superhero. Dreams don't always come true. But maybe sometimes it's okay they don't. You know, maybe there's just as much meaning to be gained from those around us as from any direct purpose to life. And as far as this film goes, at least, these are toys designed to be cared for by children.
Why would Andy want me?
I think this is the point where both their struggles throughout this film become the same struggle. Why would Andy want Woody when there's a much cooler space toy over there? Why would Andy want Buzz when he's not a real space ranger? The fear we won't be loved if we're not perfect, if we can't fly. The fear our parents or friends or whoever else's love isn't unconditional. And in some circumstances I guess that's true, but hopefully not in all. Buzz doesn't have to be perfect to be loved by Andy or by the other toys, nor does Woody need to be perfect or better than Buzz. They can both just be themselves. They'll find their own space. Sometimes it is hard to say why the people who want us, or why they care, or any of it. It's so much easier to doubt ourselves there rather than trust that we do matter, because we're also familiar with our own flaws. But we can learn to trust it, I think, at least a little more. I guess the thing about falling with style is that to a kid's eyes it would be flying. In a child's game, Buzz Lightyear would fly. He's not actually perfect and flying, but he is to Andy. None of us can fly, but we do fall with style. I guess dreams come true, but maybe not in the idealistic way we hoped. That's largely as far as this film takes us, until it all gets expanded much further in the sequel, which I suppose on some level asks the question, but what about when you don't matter to people? Among other equally soul-destroying questions that have thrown at you by such a fun and childish film. I love these films. They grapple with a lot of difficult questions when you think about it that way. I've only seen the third one once, years ago, while drunk round a friend's house, and I've never seen the fourth yet, and I can't actually remember the seconds that well, so I'm really excited to watch them all and probably make videos on them all as well. Don't know when that will be. As usual, probably a while, but we'll see what happens. I haven't even talked about Sid, actually. A very scary villain, yet also a kid who clearly doesn't have the best home life. I haven't discussed his hurts or broken toys that are first looked on as cannibals. I haven't discussed all of this from Andy's perspective as well, which I think is basically the pain and guilt that his carelessness is the reason Woody and Buzz have gone missing. That if he'd taken more care about where he put them, they wouldn't have been lost. Which would then sort of be like telling himself they went missing because he didn't love them enough, and that's a huge guilt to put upon yourself. Losing a favourite toy as a kid can be incredibly painful. Generally, I just love how the film crafts these different communities of toys quite logically out of what their experiences are. Like, even just the fact toys living in the claw machine would look on the claw like some divine being.
Claw is our master. Claw chooses who will go and who will stay.
You know, it makes perfect sense, and it cracks me up when Woody screams at them.
Stop again, Alex!
Everything comes together so perfectly in this film. I know it's highly rated, but I also kind of think it's underrated at the same time. It has everything. I've tried to talk about some of the stuff that stood out to me. Let me know what I've missed, what I've got wrong, whatever else. Like the video if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to help me just squeeze over that 100,000 subscriber mark. Support me on Patreon if you fancy that, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Devin, Kestrel, Arwen, Janice McMahon, Luke Hoare, Treat Chukaba, Michael Gallagher, In Squares, Dustin Paulson, Brian Herring, Samara Salsi, Sharikov2814, Joshua C. Follier, Chad Bramwell, Incomplete Sentience, and Nicholas Patrick. Thank you.